The following is a hockey podcast out of Vancouver and Surrey, British Columbia. It'll only consist of a lot of puck talk and even more BS, or in actual words, banter and satire. Enjoy, and as always, go Canucks go.
Patrik Allvin. You dog, you've done it again.
You're Locked On Canucks, your daily podcast on the Vancouver Canucks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, happy Monday and welcome to another episode of Locked On Canucks. My name is Trevor Beggs, co-host of Locked On Canucks and also a Canucks writer for Daily Hive Vancouver. Before we dive into this episode with some news in the middle of summer, we love it, baby. But before we do that, we got to thank you. I'm talking to you for tuning into Locked On Canucks. But you know why? Because it is your team every damn day. We're part of that Locked On Podcast Network. They're doing the most for sports fans across the world. And for our show, if you haven't done so already, what are you waiting for? Make sure you go subscribe, like, follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And we ain't here without the sponsors. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Go download that Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Now, last summer, it was the dead of summer, okay? It was early August 8th, I believe. And what did Patrik Allvin do when the rest of the NHL was snoozing? He signs Pius Suter, also a Detroit Red Wing, to a 2-year deal worth $1.6 million. And you know what? Year one in Pius Suter, it worked out pretty damn well. So what does Patrik Allvin do this time around? And you've heard the news by now. It broke on Saturday afternoon. The Canucks sign winger Daniel Sprong, also formerly of the Detroit Red Wings, to a 1-year deal worth $975,000. Now, Daniel Sprong, he's been one of the most proficient scorers in the NHL, but he's been stable to the fourth line. So what's going on with Daniel Sprong? I'll tell you why I like this signing. We'll get into a little bit about things you need to know and probably don't know about Daniel Sprong. And of course, we'll pump Patrik Allvin's tires because this man is getting things done for your Vancouver Canucks. Again, I'm going solo today. Kyle Bowen sleeping in. I think he had a late night with Pornhub.com or something like that. I'm not quite sure, but here I am, Trevor Beggs, co-host of Locked On Canucks. And we wanted to do the Daniel Sprong stuff over the weekend, but it's summer, baby, okay? We got beaches to go to. I got mouths to feed. But lo and behold, I've been itching to talk about this Daniel Sprong signing because, man, oh man, this guy, all he's done over the past few seasons is score at a first-line rate, not even a first-line rate, but he's been one of the most proficient scorers in hockey. But because of the flaws in his game, teams are a little gun-shy about him, okay? And that's really been the case since he was a prospect, since he entered the NHL. And because of that, Patrik Allvin has got him at a hell of a discount here. And let's get into it, okay? Daniel Sprong, 1-year deal worth $975,000. This is a guy who last season nearly had 20 goals and 43 points while playing in a fourth-line role, okay? Fourth line, second power play unit time, the old Sam Gagner plan from 2017-2018, if you will. Except this one's actually worked out for both the Kraken and the Red Wings over the past couple of seasons. Daniel Sprong, again, $975,000. This guy, after what he did in Seattle the year before, very similar statistics, actually. He signed for a 1-year, $2 million deal with Detroit last offseason. So in a world where the cap has gone up, the Canucks are still getting Daniel Sprong at less than half the cap hit that he signed for just one season ago. And it's clear that, this is a guy who is not trusted by a lot of NHL teams, right? They see that defensive flaws in his game. But Patrik Allvin, and might I remind you, Patrik Allvin and Jim Rutherford were the tandem that originally drafted Daniel Sprong back in 2015. They've said, to hell with those numbers, we're giving this guy a chance. And how can you argue with this deal when the guy's making, again, $975,000 per season? That's about 1/90th of the Canucks cap hit. Not a bad bit of work, a tidy piece of business, if you will. One thing I was enjoying this morning was I was looking at the Athletic player card model again. They basically take both your counting stats and your underlying stats and give a player a value in terms of what they should be worth under the cap hit. And you look at what the Canucks have done with Danton Heinen, Kiefer Sherwood, and Daniel Sprong, and even Jake DeBrusk to an extent. They've found value with all of those guys, according to the analytics. Now, say what you will. Numbers are numbers. I know what you're saying, Trevor. Don't be such a nerd. Don't be such a fancy stats boy. Hey, I love the fancy stats, and I love this, okay? Daniel Sprong last season, the analytics live up to the reputation, right? Last season, his defensive metrics were pretty brutal, despite being heavily sheltered with the Detroit Red Wings. He was on the ice for, I think, the second highest amount of shots against and scoring chances against at even strength last season, which, again, in a sheltered role, that's not great. That's not great. But again, at that $975,000 cap hit, he is certainly worth a flyer for your Vancouver Canucks. And because of his elite offensive production, where, he produced at a slightly above average clip in terms of the chances he created, in terms of the shots he got on goal, but he's a good finisher. And, this Canucks team we saw last year had quite a few good finishers, right? The issue was the amount of shots they got on goal. And does Daniel Sprong help increase the volume? I'm not so sure about that, but I do believe he'll help increase the efficiency, especially when, and we might not get into it in this episode, but a guy like Vasily Podkolzin now is really on the outside looking in. And that guy Podkolzin had 2 assists and no goals in 18 NHL games last season. Sprong makes this Canucks team more dangerous, more lethal up front. And you look at that team overall, and the guys they brought in, DeBrusk profiles as a good two-way winger. Heinen profiles as a good two-way winger. Sherwood profiles as a good two-way winger. We know what Garland and Joshua are capable of. Miller and Besser were great defensively. Pettersson, for the most part, was good defensively until he started to go downhill. But my point is that this Canucks team has quite a few forwards up front now who are good defensively. And those are the guys that were prioritized in free agency, right? Heinen, Sherwood, and DeBrusk. All good two-way players. Sprong not so much, but hey, that's why he was available on July 20th at a bargain for your Vancouver Canucks. Let me touch on the athletic player card model quickly. Daniel Sprong valued at $2.8 million based on the contributions he gave to the Detroit Red Wings last season. It was even higher a year ago with the Kraken when he actually had more points in fewer games. He had 21 goals, 46 points in 66 games for Seattle in 2022-23. Might I add, he came to Seattle on a PTO after being traded to them at the deadline the season before. And with Detroit, again, they signed him, relatively quickly last offseason to a 1-year deal worth $2 million. But you look at, you look at Daniel Sprong, $2.8 million value, signed for $975,000. Danton Heinen signed for $2.25 million. He was valued at $4.2 million, according to the athletic player card model. And then finally, Kiefer Sherwood signed for $1.5 million, and he was valued at $3.7 million. So in all three of those deals, the Canucks are getting a guy who probably should be paid about $2 million more, according to the player card model. And again, take it with a grain of salt. Take it for what you will. But I'm taking it this way. Patrik Allvin, you've done it again and again and again. We talked about it last week, okay? Patrik Allvin pulled a quick one on the NHL with what we called two of the best value signings. Go check that episode out if you haven't already, in Heinen and Sherwood. And he's done it here again with Daniel Sprong. Now, we'll talk a bit more on the other side about where we think Daniel Sprong should play in the lineup. I say we. I'm talking on behalf of Cal Bowen today, baby. Go check out calbowen.com, the mastermind, if you haven't already. We'll talk about where Sprong should fit into the lineup. We'll also talk about some other things that you may not know about Daniel Sprong, including his draft profile, things that he likes, a bit of his upbringing, and maybe why he wasn't such a beloved teammate earlier on in his career. All that and more coming up on the other side. But hey, we got to shout out our sponsors if we got to get paid, all right? And today, that sponsor is Gametime. You know the deal, baby. It's there's not many sports going on right now, okay? In fact, there's next to nothing unless you're an MLB guy or you're going to Paris for the Olympics. But, if you are into those things, make sure you go use Gametime, okay? Because Gametime, they do it all. And the one thing I really love about Gametime is it got that lowest price guarantee. I'm telling you, there is no other place where you should be going to buy tickets, all right? They make getting tickets faster and easier. And if you are going to check out some MLB or another sporting event, guess what? The prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. So if you don't have kids, unlike me, and you can live life a bit spontaneously, Gametime, they're the place to go get those tickets, okay? And if you don't like baseball, you can go check out or get tickets for concerts, comedy events, theater, and more. Or go check out those BC Lions. I know they lost yesterday on the road, but they're a wagon, okay? Shout out to my BC Lions. Whatever kind of tickets you're buying, just make sure you go use that Gametime app, baby. All right? Last-minute deals, flash deals, zone deals, all in pricing and that lowest price guarantee. Go download that Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets. Lowest price guaranteed. All right, I'm back here on Locked On Canucks again. Might I remind you, it's your Canucks every damn day. Even in July. And we keep saying in July when nothing's going on, but something actually happened over the weekend, okay? And would have been nice if Kyle and I could have jumped on live, but that's on me. I was working on my tan. Can't you tell? Lots of time outside. Hey, in Canada, you only get a couple months of warm weather. Daniel Sprong, okay? He had an interesting path to the NHL. We'll put it that way. And I think you might know some of the story, but you might not know all the story. So Daniel Sprong was born in Amsterdam. Okay. Born in Amsterdam, baby. Let's go. He knows what it's all about. That's why he's coming to Vancouver? Because he was born in Amsterdam, right? Yeah, you know the deal. So Daniel Sprong, obviously hockey's not a crazy popular sport in the Netherlands, but his dad played hockey professionally in the Netherlands. He managed a team, and Daniel Sprong, obviously grew up in a hockey household. He ended up playing against kids who were 12 and 13 years old when he was just between the ages of 4 and 5. That's crazy. This guy was in kindergarten, and he was playing against teenagers over in the Netherlands. That is wild stuff. So to help further his hockey career, Daniel Sprong moved to Quebec at the age of 7. And funny enough, Daniel Sprong, he had a quote where he's talking about how basically it wasn't supposed to be a long-term thing. His family said they might try it out for 1 year, see how it goes, but they were probably going to move back. But what happened with the Sprong family is they fell in love with the city of Montreal, and they ended up staying there. And Daniel Sprong to this day kind of considers himself a Montrealer, has talked about how special it is to go back in that building and play, score some goals. And again, he identifies himself as a Montrealer and a Canadian too. And in fact, Daniel Sprong has turned down opportunities to play for the Netherlands national team. Maybe in part because not really in any big hockey competitions, but he said he wants to play for Team Canada. So again, Daniel Sprong's career hasn't quite gone that direction, but maybe a world championships or something like that in his future. Now, fast forward a bit, the guy throughout his junior career was kind of considered, known to have a great shot, to be a great offensive producer, but the flaws in his defensive game were evident even when he was in junior. And you look at scouting reports and you're like, this guy could be a star, or he might flame out and turn into nothing because, he just doesn't have the defensive chops. I mean, that's turned out to be true, and it's the reason why he's maybe the most lethal fourth liner in the game today. At the time when he was drafted, scouts were comparing him to Phil Kessel. And that was obviously a bit of a high bar that Sprong has not reached, but there's similarities in their games in the sense that scouts saw someone who's going to be frustrating to coach, someone who had obviously some great offensive gifts, but someone who's going to frustrate coaches. And that's why he's now on his 5th NHL team. He was drafted by Rutherford and Allvin, as I mentioned. They traded him to the Anaheim Ducks in 2018 for Marcus Pettersson. He was then traded to the Washington Capitals, traded to the Seattle Kraken, and signed with the Detroit Red Wings. So he's now on his 5th NHL team. Now, there were some reports around the time that he was drafted or joined Pittsburgh, I should say. And in fact, he was actually, after being drafted, he was drafted in the second round, 46th overall by Rutherford and Allvin and the Pittsburgh Penguins. He actually cracked the team on a training camp. he became, again, it's pretty rare that a second-round pick goes right from being drafted to the NHL, but that's what Sprong did. At the time, he was the first second-round pick to crack the team out of training camp right after being drafted since Brandon Saad in 2011 with the Chicago Blackhawks. So impressive stuff from Sprong. He showed right off the bat that he could play. In fact, though, his Pittsburgh tenure didn't last long. He was sent back to junior and only played 46 career games for those Pittsburgh Penguins before being traded. But at the time, there were reports, and this has been written about in The Athletic, that Daniel Sprong was, in fact, he had to Uber to Pittsburgh facilities because the veterans on the team didn't really like his attitude, okay? And, I've read some stuff online about how, Dutch people are very direct. I've actually loved all the Dutch people I've met in my life. But someone's writing about how Dutch people can be very direct, and that can be taken as being rude. I think that might be a bit of an excuse because, Sprong, again, was raised in Canada after the age of 7. The majority of his life has been spent in Canada. But we've seen time and time again, look, this guy had 12 minutes of ice time per game last season. That's including power play time. This is a guy that just has not earned the trust of coaches because his defensive metrics suck. They suck. They're brutal. And you watch some of the tape, and this guy does kind of check out defensively sometimes. Is always kind of cherry picking to get back up on the rush the other way. I think he needs to play with some defensively responsible line mates to succeed in the NHL. And that does make me wonder if he could be a potential fit on a Miller-Besser line. Maybe. I mean, Pettersson, I think you got to put him with some safer wingers right now. And Kyle and I will do some lineup projections this week. But I do wonder just initially if playing with Miller and Besser might be the spot for Daniel Sprong, because you got two wingers who have scored at an elite rate, who are good defensively. Maybe they can insulate some of Sprong's game. Although, again, how are those two going to feel about it if Sprong's not doing the work defensively, but they are? Think that can rub off on Sprong. But again, he's on his 5th NHL team, and this has proven to be an issue throughout his NHL career. So I think the odds of that are, I think they're pretty slim. Okay. Again, Daniel Sprong was far down the lineup in terms of wings forwards last season and the ice time they got. Let's see where he ranked among, I think he was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10th overall in ice time. So yeah, a solid 4th liner for those Detroit Red Wings. But what has he done in those minutes? Okay. Daniel Sprong has, again, scored at an elite rate. Let me list off the names. Okay. So Daniel Sprong, since the beginning of the 2022-23 season when he was with Seattle, so the last 2 seasons, he has the 11th highest points per 60 in the NHL. And every single player ahead of him is a bona fide star. Let me list them off, okay? It goes Nathan McKinnon, Connor McDavid, David Pastrnak, Austin Matthews, Nikita Kucherov, Elias Pettersson. So, hey, you Pettersson haters out there, I know he had a rough end of last season. I know that he knows he needs to be way better. But over the last 2 seasons, Elias Pettersson has the 6th most points per 60 at even strength in the NHL. Just remember that, okay, if you're doubting the guy. So Pettersson at 6, Marner at 7, Braden Point at 8, Sidney Crosby 9th, Matthew Tkachuk 10th, and Daniel Sprong at 11th with 2.69 points per 60. That's impressive stuff from a guy who barely gets into NHL lineups. And again, I'm so curious to see what he can do with these Vancouver Canucks, with this coaching staff. And maybe let me know in the comments, is he going to, let's say break his career to highs in terms of goals and points? Is that more likely? Or is it more likely that he ends up as a healthy scratch and rides the pine a little bit with your Vancouver Canucks? Because I think both are plausible outcomes, right? I know we want to be optimistic Canuck fans here. I want to be an optimistic Canuck fan. But the truth is, this guy just hasn't worked out with 4 other teams thus far. So is this guy going to work out with the Vancouver Canucks? I'm believing it, baby. I'm believing it. Let's wrap up the show on the other side with some of your comments, a little bit more about what you didn't know about Daniel Sprong. I'll bring up some fun facts about him. And I'll talk about, is he a potential candidate for Power Play 1 with your Vancouver Canucks? Going to get to that shortly after we shout out our friends over at eBay Motors. You know the deal. Whether you drive a cardboard box on wheels like me or a souped out Honda Civic like Kyle Bowen, you got to go check out eBay Motors, okay? Because they know the deal. It's passion, it's drive, and it's patience. That's the formula for winning championships, and that's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with that eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash, baby. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Oh, yeah, baby. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, you're back here on Locked On Canucks, your Canucks every day. And the Canucks making splashes, making moves in late July. You got to love it, okay? You got to love it. Because Patrik Allvin has once again done it again, finding value on the free agent market. And look at what he's done this offseason, right? I mean, I think aside from Vincent Desharnais, you could argue that every signing he's done has been pretty much a above value signing. I'll even bring up a guy like Derek Forbort. And I know this guy got a bit of flack in Boston for being, turnover prone and obviously doesn't produce a lot of offense. But Derek Forbort, according to the Athletic Player Card model, valued at $3.3 million, largely for his defensive work. Well, largely, pretty much entirely for his defensive work and penalty killing metrics. And then you got Jake DeBrusk as well, who the analytics loved him. All right. His market value was pretty much right around where they signed him at. But yeah, you might have seen the fancy boys writing about him, saying that the Canucks made a good signing. When I had my like an apple in my throat when I heard about that signing. I was like, what's going on? Unbelievable, man. Unbelievable. Daniel Sprong, ding dong, it's Daniel Sprong. He's joined your Vancouver Canucks. Heard some cheesy calls with that guy too. You can call him Big Dong Sprong. Maybe let me know in the comments what is the best nickname for Daniel Sprong. All right. Big Dong Sprong. That one stands out to me. Let me get to some comments here and I'll tell you a bit more fun facts about Daniel Sprong. And then I might talk a bit about where I think he slots in on the power play. Kurt Richards is saying jersey number 420 because, hey, Daniel Sprong from Amsterdam, baby. Let's go. All right. So, fun fact about Daniel Sprong here. He said in recent interviews that his favorite jersey numbers are 11 and 91. So obviously he's not going to wear 11 with the Vancouver Canucks because of the Messier, because of the Wayne Mackey. But 91, unless I'm missing something, it's still up for grabs. That was Nikita Zadorov's old number. It's been vacated. So my guess is going to be that Daniel Sprong wears number 91 for your Vancouver Canucks. He wore 17 last season for the Detroit Red Wings. And I'm assuming that's because his favorite player, from what he said, is Ilya Kovalchuk. And, that's interesting because obviously he's not at Kovalchuk's level, but there's a similarities between their games, right? Daniel Sprong being an elite offensive producer, has a great shot, and does not like to play defense. That kind of sums up Ilya Kovalchuk's game too. Now, let me touch a bit on his power play opportunities. So I do wonder, and I don't think it's necessarily likely, but if Daniel Sprong gets a shot on power play one. Look, there's one spot available, and it's probably going to Jake DeBrusk. I think that's the guy based on what they're paying him. I would be shocked if Jake DeBrusk doesn't get the first shot on PP1. But that being said, Daniel Sprong has been a good producer on the power play for the last couple seasons, including last season with the Detroit Red Wings, right? Sheltered second power play unit minutes. The guy had 12 power play points. He had 3 goals, 9 assists. And again, we know nowadays in the NHL, the second pairings for the most part don't get a ton of time. I think Detroit, that second pairing got a bit more time. The second unit got a bit more time because, there's not a lot of stars in the Detroit Red Wings, right? So I could see Daniel Sprong potentially getting an opportunity in the power play one. At least if the power play stumbles out of the gate, I think that guy is likely to get a shot on PP1. We'll see how it goes. And I'm gonna show this comment because I got a big ego. And SK93 is stroking it. He said, Trevor Beggs, you called it Sprong to the Canucks. Look, we were going with Nylander first. I think it was a bit of a sexier title, if you will. I wish I went a little bit harder on Sprong. I mean, we did talk about it a little bit, but what I didn't touch on last week was the ties between Daniel Sprong and this management group, right? They drafted him. They did trade him away, but they did draft him as well. And Rutherford, just reading about it this morning, wasn't thrilled about trading Daniel Sprong at the time, but he knew that's what he needed to do to acquire a defenseman. And what did Marcus Pettersson do? That trade helped win Pittsburgh 2 Stanley Cups. So it's hard to argue with the logic there. But Rutherford said it, and I don't have it in front of me, that it was really hard to trade away Daniel Sprong. He believed he could become a really good NHLer. He just didn't think that path was in Pittsburgh. Again, for a team who was competing for the Stanley Cup, and he was a young guy who, at that point in his career, played less than 50 games, right? He ended up with 46 career games with the Pittsburgh Penguins over the span of 4 seasons. One was spent entirely down in the minors. So it wasn't like he had a ton of opportunity with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Kurt Richardson saying that AFP had him, around $3 to $4 million. I mean, again, look at his production, right? Look at his production. All the guys on his produced. Look at the names ahead of him. McKinnon, McDavid, Pastrnak, Matthews, Kucherov, Pettersson, Marner, Point, Crosby, and Tkachuk. Those are the only 10 players who have a higher points per 60 over the past 2 seasons. That's unreal. If you want me to finish off the list going to 15, Sprong's at 11. You have Panarin at 12, Nikolai Ehlers at 13, Alex Tuck at 14, and Nico Hischier at 15. So maybe this firepower or the star power starts to drop off a little bit, but for the most part, it's a pretty damn good signing for your Vancouver Canucks, okay? And I'll shout out this from Kempner because I made a comment about Pettersson. Kempner. Check out Kempner Canucks. Maybe we'll have Kempner. You should join us on the show, buddy, at some point this summer. I know after the All-Star break, he's saying that Pettersson's production after the All-Star game and playoffs, tell him about that. Yeah, it sucked. We talked about it. In fact, we talked about it on our last episode. Make sure you go check that out. We talked about Elias Pettersson, what went wrong last season and what needs to happen if he's going to figure it out moving forward. Project Pete, if you will. Player preview, if you will. Because, those numbers fell off a cliff, and I do believe Pettersson is mainly between the ears. Daniel Sprong, I don't think it's really between the ears. I think it's, can he play defense at least an average rate in the NHL? Can he backcheck just a little bit? And if he does, not only is this signing to be a stealing, it might end up being one of the best signings from free agency here in the 2024 offseason. All right. And last comment goes to Gary Wiseman. Okay. I like this one. So Canucks getting Crosby confirmed. You know what? Maybe they're going to dip back into the well here because, Daniel Sprong, former Pittsburgh Penguin, last offseason got, Lafferty into Smith. This organization likes getting former Penguins. Why not make Crosby a former Penguin? Bring him to the Vancouver Canucks, and let's watch the city win their first Stanley Cup ever. All right, I'm going down too fun of a rabbit hole. I got to get out of here. Shout out to the everydayers, the occasional listeners, the first-time listeners, the new subscribers, and those of you who join us on the live show on YouTube. We love each and every one of you, your family, and your dogs too. Kyle Bowen back later this week. We will give our lineup projections, among other things here on Locked On Canucks, but I got to get out of here. I'm Trevor Beggs, signing off. Thanks for listening to Locked On Canucks, your Canucks every day.
You're Locked On Canucks, your daily podcast on the Vancouver Canucks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.